Patricia Harmon had a tell. When she was nervous, she organized things. In 30 years of knowing her, I watched her sort mail that was already sorted, restack books that were already stacked, rearrange silverware between courses. She couldn't tolerate disorder when things weren't going according to plan. It was the most honest thing about her. So when I walked through the conference room door on that Thursday morning, and Patricia Harmon was sitting completely, perfectly, unnaturally still, her coffee cup a half-inch from her right hand untouched, I understood immediately what that stillness meant. She was doing math. The math of a woman who had spent 3 days believing she'd solved a problem. And the answer wasn't adding up. My name is Mayata Torres. I'm 34 years old. I work in financial forensics. I find money that people are certain they've hidden. And on the morning of my grandfather's will reading, I walked into that conference room with a briefcase containing documentation of 2 felonies, 1 attempted murder, and the only thing my grandfather ever wanted to give me directly. The truth he spent the last year of his life building. Piece by piece, for the moment I'd be ready to use it. Welcome to Alexandra Stories, where the people who get underestimated fight back with evidence. If you're new here, hit subscribe, because this story has layers and every one of them matters. I need to tell you about Raymond Delgado before I tell you anything else. Not because the story starts with him. The story starts with a puddle of brake fluid in a parking lot at 7 in the morning, but because nothing that follows makes sense without understanding what he was. Pop, that's what I called him. From the time I was 8 years old, was 82 when he died 14 months ago. He'd spent 40 years building custom furniture in a workshop behind his house in Tucson. Not factory work, not kits, hand tools, dressers, bed frames, dining tables built one at a time from rough lumber. He had 300 tools organized on a pegboard wall by size and function. And if you borrowed one without telling him, he'd notice before you put it back. He said a craftsman's relationship with his tools was the same as a person's relationship with the truth. If you don't handle them honestly, they'll work against you when it counts. I was placed with the Harmon family at age 7, after my biological mother died in a car accident. My father had been gone since I was 4. There was no other family, no safety net, just a caseworker and a filing system. Patricia Harmon had seen a church bulletin about foster care and decided she wanted a daughter. She gave me a bedroom with yellow curtains she picked herself. She introduced me at her book club. She signed the papers. Pop was Gerald Harmon's father. He drove up from Tucson twice a year and stayed in the guest room, ate breakfast at 5:30 a.m., and worked quietly in the backyard with whatever tools Gerald allowed him to bring. The first time he really talked to me. Not about me. Not around me. I was 9. He was working on a small cabinet in the backyard, and he handed me a chisel and showed me how to cut a dovetail joint. He said, "You hold the wood or the wood holds you. You're asking it a question when you cut. When it answers, stop. Don't push past the answer." I didn't fully understand what he meant. I kept the chisel. It was on my windowsill the morning all of this happened. 25 years later. Same chisel, same beveled edge, smooth from decades of handling. Pop treated me like family the way you treat someone when family is a verb you choose every time, not a noun that gets assigned. The Harmons were a family that had learned, early on. That family was mostly a story you told in public. Gerald, 60, ran a property management company that spent most of its existence balanced at the edge of solvency. He wore pressed shirts and talked about turning corners that never quite turned. Patricia, 57, served on the HOA board, organized school fundraisers, and kept a household that looked immaculate from every angle that mattered publicly. Kevin, 28, was his father's shadow. He did what Gerald did, thought what Gerald thought, and called the result his own opinion. He was never unkind to me. He was just his father's son and didn't know how to be otherwise. I moved out at 21, Arizona State for accounting and finance. 2 more years of self-study in forensic methods, and I was working fraud detection for a Phoenix firm. By 30, I was independent, 3 corporate clients, a small apartment, and a standing Saturday call with Pop that lasted exactly as long as we wanted it to. He died in March. I missed those calls in a way I wasn't prepared for. Pop's health began declining 18 months before he died. Gradual at first, then fast in the way these things accelerate once they start. I flew to Tucson 6 times in the final year, sometimes for a week, sometimes for a weekend, whatever he needed. On my 3rd visit, he asked me to help him organize his financial documents. Not manage them, he was sharp until the last month, just label, structure, make sure everything was in order. his words. I want to know my house is organized before I leave it. That's when I saw the number that didn't fit. A transfer. $11,000 from his primary account, routed to a subsidiary account I didn't recognize in the records. I asked Pop about it, keeping my voice the same neutral casual tone I use when I ask a CFO about a line item I already know is wrong. He paused for 3 full seconds, then he said it was a transfer related to a property matter. His voice was even, his hands resting on the table. Weren't. I wrote it down and said nothing more. Over the next 6 weeks, working from my apartment in Phoenix, I ran what I'd call a soft trace, no formal process, nothing aggressive. Just a forensic accountant doing what forensic accountants can't help but do with a spreadsheet and a quiet evening. I found 11 more transfers. Over 22 months, a total of $189,000 had moved from Pop's accounts in increments, routed through a Delaware-registered LLC called GH Properties. GH Properties, Gerald Harmon. I want to be precise about the decision I made next, because it's the decision that shaped everything that followed. I did not call Gerald. I did not confront Patricia. I did not tell Pop what I'd traced, not because I didn't trust him, but because I'd watched what happened in corporate investigations the moment. Subjects knew they were being watched. The money moved. The records disappeared. The stories aligned. In a family with 3 people and 30 years of shared secrets, it would happen within hours. I built the evidence file. I documented every transaction. I dated every exhibit and backed everything up. Then I waited. What I didn't know yet was that Gerald had already stopped waiting. Pop died on a Sunday. I was on the phone with him 3 hours before he passed. A normal call, the kind we always had. Mostly talking around the subject of how he was doing by talking about everything else. Near the end, he asked if I still had the chisel. I said yes. He was quiet for a moment and then he said, "Everything I built to last. You'll know what to do when you find it." I thought he was talking about the furniture, the pieces that would need homes after he was gone. I understand now he meant the other thing entirely. At the funeral in Tucson, 200 people came who had genuinely loved Pop. Apprentices, neighbors, men he'd hired when no shop in the city would. The Harmons sat in the front row. Patricia in black with composure that never cracked. Gerald staring at the floor. Kevin checking his phone under the program. After the service, Patricia found me by the parking lot. She waited until the crowd thinned, then put one hand on my arm. She said, "I want you to know how much we appreciate everything you did for Raymond. You were so devoted." She said it the way you'd thank a housekeeper for a good final season. Warmth with a full stop at the end of it. I smiled and got in my car. On the drive to the airport, I called Thomas Reyes, Pop's estate attorney. I'd met him twice in the past year while helping Pop organize documents. I asked if the will reading had been scheduled. He said 2 weeks out. Then he paused, and the pause held something in it. "Maya, there's something I should tell you when we have more time. But yes, you'll receive notification." I filed that pause the way I file everything. Labeled, dated, pending follow-up. In the week before the reading, I stopped running a soft trace and started running the full forensic case. GH Properties was a standard Delaware shell. Minimal registration, maximum privacy. The account it used to receive Pop's transfers had been opened 2 years and 4 months ago. 3 months after Patricia offered to help Pop manage his bills following his first hospital stay. The money flowed into GH Properties, and from there 3 streams. Stream 1. Suzanne applied directly against a tax delinquency that Gerald's property management company had accumulated over 4 years. I pulled the delinquency notice, I pulled the payment confirmation, I put them side by side. Stream 2. Suzanne in a series of payments against a personal home equity loan in Gerald's name, a loan he'd taken out without telling Pop, used to fund a commercial property acquisition that failed within 18 months. Stream 3, $36. Zero transferred as consulting fees to a second LLC, Harmon Advisory Group, registered to Kevin Harmon. Kevin had registered it 8 weeks before the first consulting payment arrived, $189,000, 22 months. A dying man's savings, redirected by the people he'd trusted to help him pay his electric bill. I built the report the way I build all my reports. Executive summary, transaction log, entity mapping, forensic timeline. When you present evidence to a judge, the story has to be cleaner than the crime. Every figure cross-referenced, every document traced to its primary source. I finished at 2 a.m, 5 days before the reading. Sat back and looked at the number on the screen, $189,000. Then I closed the laptop and lay down on my couch and tried to sleep. Somewhere across Phoenix, a decision was being made about me. 4 days before the reading, I walked out of my building at 7 a.m., with a bag over one shoulder and keys in my hand. I was half my car when I noticed the smell. Chemical, faint. The specific smell you know if you've spent time around cars. And then I saw the small dark spot on the concrete beneath my front axle, spreading slowly, still dripping. I did not touch anything. I walked back inside, called a mechanic I trusted, a woman named Diane at a shop on Camelback, and told her to come to the lot. Don't let anyone near the car. Then I opened my door camera app. The camera is small, mounted at an angle that catches the parking lot. I'd installed it 18 months earlier after a neighbour had a break-in. It writes to a cloud drive. At 1:52 a.m., a white pickup had entered my parking lot, plates visible. At 2:31 a.m. it left. I ran the plate on a skip trace service I subscribed to through my forensic license. It came back registered to Gerald Harmon. I sat on the edge of my couch and spent approximately 4 minutes simply deciding what the next 4 days looked like. Not panicking. Panic is a choice, and I'd made a different one. Then I called Sergeant Mia Park at the Phoenix PD Financial Crimes Division. We'd worked a corporate embezzlement case together 2 years earlier. She knew how I operated. Mia, I said, I need to tell you something. And then I need to ask you something that's going to sound extreme. I need you to trust my read, she said. Talk to me. Diane arrived at 8:15. She was under the car for 4 minutes. When she came out, her face was the face of someone choosing words with precision. Both front lines, she said. Not worn, not corroded, cut clean. Whoever did this knew exactly what they were doing and exactly how long the failure would take. She wrote a sworn inspection report on the spot. Photographs from 8 angles, fluid samples, chain of custody from the moment she touched the vehicle. Mia arrived 30 minutes later with a crime tech and a camera. She reviewed the door footage, downloaded it to an evidence drive, then read through the 17 pages of financial documentation I handed her without saying anything. She looked up. How long have you had this? 3 months of documentation, I told her. I was waiting for the right moment to present it. She looked at me with an expression that sat somewhere between professional respect and genuine exasperation. Here's what I want to do, I said. In 4 days, all 3 of them will be in Thomas Rayer's conference room for the will reading. If you move on Gerald today, Patricia has 4 days to access whatever record she can reach, and Kevin has 4 days to build a story. But if we wait, all 3 are in the same room. Let me go in as executor, present the forensic report, and when I text you, you come in. Mia said, You're asking me to let you walk into a room with 3 people, at least one of whom just had someone cut your brake lines in the middle of the night. I need them to believe I don't know about the car, I said. She was quiet for a long moment. 3 uniformed officers and 2 unmarked vehicles outside that building. Done. You answer my calls for the next 4 days, no exceptions. Done. What happened next was the part I hadn't planned. The discovery that changed what I thought I was walking into. I checked into a motel under a colleague's name that afternoon. Cash, burner phone. For the first 24 hours, I rebuilt the forensic report from the ground up. Not because it was incomplete, but because I needed it to hold up, under adversarial review. Every exhibit cross-referenced, every timestamp verified. Every document traced to a primary source you could independently confirm. On the second night, I was going through Pop's cloud account, the one I'd helped him set up 3 years ago, searching for any document I might have missed. And I found the folder. It was labelled with my initials, MT nested 3 levels deep inside subfolders titled Workshop Notes and MISC. Pop had been meticulous about hiding it inside. 14 scanned documents. The earliest was dated 16 months ago, a photograph of a bank statement with a sticky note in Pop's handwriting, shaky but legible. Gerald's company. I did not authorize this, a circle around a line item. $14,000 transferred. He'd found it himself, long before I had. He'd been documenting it the way he documented everything in his life. 1 piece at a time. Methodically, honestly. Without the forensic training to trace it fully, but with the craftsman's instinct to record what he observed. Statements, notes, dates. Photographs of paper records taken with his phone. 14 documents spanning 16 months, 3 levels deep, labelled with my initials. He was leaving it for me. He'd been building it for me for over a year and waiting for me to find the folder. I sat in that motel room at midnight and looked at the screen for a long time. I thought about the last phone call. You'll know what to do when you find it. and understood that he hadn't been talking about furniture at all. He'd been giving me directions. I added his 14 documents to the evidence file, cross-referenced them against my forensic timeline, and kept working. The folder confirmed 3 transactions I'd traced only partially. It also confirmed something I hadn't been able to document directly. Pop had confronted Gerald once, 9 months ago, and Gerald had told him the transfers were management fees that Pop had agreed to and simply forgotten. Pop had written, on a sticky note attached to the record of that conversation. I did not forget, I was never asked. I wound my watch, an old habit, nothing particular, and I let the room be quiet for a few minutes. I found it, Pop, I've got it. The night before the reading, Thomas called me on the burner. I mentioned at the funeral there was something I needed to tell you, he said. 2 months before Raymond died. He came to my office in person, wheelchair, 2-hour round trip from Tucson. He changed the executor of his estate from Gerald to you. He also left a sealed letter with a specific instruction. It can only be opened if you're present at the reading. What if I'm not there? I asked. The letter goes into my permanent file and stays sealed indefinitely. What's in it? He sealed it himself. I genuinely don't know. I told him to keep the reading as scheduled. Thursday, 10 a.m. I'll be there, I said. But I need you to do something for me. Thursday morning. Grey slacks, dark blazer, white shirt. I put the chisel in my bag, not as a symbol, just because it was the first thing Pop had ever put in my hands, and it felt correct to bring it. Thomas met me in the parking structure. I gave him the forensic report, 63 pages, 6 sections tabbed and cross-referenced, a second copy sealed in an envelope for his records, a third on a USB drive. He read the executive summary in 40 seconds, looked up. Raymond would be proud of you, he said. He would have told us to stop talking and go finish it, I said. Thomas almost smiled. Then, ready? I sent 1 text to Mia. Standing by, she replied. 3 outside, 2 unmarked, warrants sealed and ready. I took the elevator to the 14th floor. Through the glass panel in the conference room door, I could see all 3 of them. Patricia at the far end, phone in her right hand, legs crossed. The posture of a woman projecting normalcy. Gerald to her left, both hands flat on the table. Kevin in the corner chair, jaw working the way it had since he was a teenager when he was somewhere between nervous and guilty. I pushed the door open. Patricia looked up. The phone didn't fall. She was too controlled for that, but her hand stopped moving. Every muscle in her face went to a different kind of stillness. Not the composed stillness she'd walked in wearing, but the stillness of someone whose internal calculations just broke. Gerald said Maya, just my name, just the one word, said the way you say something you've been rehearsing and still aren't ready for. Good morning, I said. I took the chair beside Thomas, set my bag down, folded my hands. Nobody asked if I was all right. Nobody asked where I'd been for 3 days. Nobody mentioned a parking lot, a car, a brake line, a puddle on asphalt. Because asking those questions would have required having answers, and none of them had spent the last 72 hours preparing answers. They'd spent them believing the question would never be asked. Thomas opened the will, Pop's estate, the property in Tucson, the house and the workshop, his accounts, a life insurance policy, the proceeds from 4 decades of furniture sales held in trust, total appraised value, approximately $6,000 and $12,000 after debts, distribution, equal thirds Gerald Harmon, Kevin Harmon, Maya Torres. I watched what equal thirds did to that room. Patricia let out one long, slow breath. Her shoulders came down. Gerald's hands opened from positions they'd been holding without him realizing it. Kevin looked at the ceiling and blinked rapidly. They'd been afraid. Afraid that I would receive everything, that Pop had cut them out entirely. That the girl, who wasn't really family, would inherit what they believed should be theirs by blood. They were afraid enough to send someone to my parking lot at 2 in the morning. Afraid enough to cut both front brake lines on a car I drove every day, and they were already getting equal thirds. They tried to kill me for money they were already going to receive. I let the arithmetic sit in the room for a moment. Then Thomas set the will aside and placed a sealed envelope on the table. Raymond left a personal letter for the family. His instruction was explicit. It could only be opened if Maya was present. As she is present, I'll read it now. Patricia looked at Gerald. He didn't look back. Thomas broke the seal. Pop's handwriting covered 1 full page. Thomas read it in the same steady voice he'd used for the will. I want to start with what I know. I know about the transfers. I've known for over a year. I kept my records the only way I knew how. 1 piece at a time in a folder I left for Maya. Because Maya will know what to do with them in a way I never could. Gerald. I would have given you the money if you'd asked. I would have helped you. That's what fathers do. But you didn't ask. You took. You decided I was already gone enough that it wouldn't matter. I want you to know that it mattered, Kevin. You're young enough to become something different than what you've let yourself become. That's the most generous thing I know how to say, Patricia. You gave me access to help with my bills, and I trusted you. And you used that access to sign my name, to things I never agreed to. I want you to know that I know the difference between being helped and being used. You know it too. Maya, if you're in that room, it means you figured it out. I knew you would. I changed the executor because you're the one person I trust to do what's right, rather than what's easy. Not because you owe me anything, because that's who you are. Keep the chisel. Not because it's worth anything, because you know how to listen when the wood answers. With love, Pop. Thomas folded the letter and set it down. The room held the kind of silence that has weight. I reached into my bag. I placed Pop's folder on the table, his 14 documents. The sticky notes in shaky handwriting, the circled line items, the photographs of paper statements taken on an old phone. Then I placed my forensic report beside it. 63 pages, 6 sections. Let me show you what Pop found and then what I found. I present evidence the way I was trained to present it. Without performance, without volume, without adjectives. Just the document, the date, and what it means. Page 1, the GH Properties LLC registration. Gerald Harmon, registered agent, Delaware, filed 2 years and 4 months ago. Page 7, the account opening date for the GH Properties transfer account, 3 months after Patricia was granted access to Pop's finances. Page 12, the financial flow chart, $189,000 in 22 months, distributed across 3 streams. I placed the documents on the table as I spoke. Stream 1, $91,000 to cover a tax delinquency on Gerald's property management company. I set the delinquency notice next to the payment confirmation. Stream 2, $62,000 in payments against Gerald's personal home equity loan. Stream 3, $36,000 in consulting fees to Harmon Advisory Group. An LLC Kevin had registered 8 weeks before the first payment arrived. Patricia said, Raymond authorized management fee structures, that's documented. I set 2 documents side by side on the table. This is Pop's authenticated signature, from the power of attorney filed with the Maricopa County Recorder 4 years ago. I pointed. This is the signature on the GH Properties account authorization form. I pointed to the second document. A certified forensic document examiner reviewed both. The capital R in his real signature has a rounded return on the second stroke. The authorization signature doesn't. The lowercase I closes early in the forgery. These aren't my observations. They're in the written report on page 41. I set the examiner's report on the table. Patricia's mouth closed. Gerald's hands had begun to shake. I turned to page 53. This is my door camera. Thursday morning, 1:52 a.m. I placed the still on the table. White pickup. Plates visible. This is the same vehicle at 2:31 a.m. 39 minutes. I set the mechanic's sworn inspection report beside it. Both front brake lines, deliberately severed. Perpendicular cuts consistent with a sharp cutting tool. No wear, no corrosion, no accident. Gerald stared at the photograph of his own truck. Kevin said quietly, I didn't know about the car. His voice broke slightly on the last word. Mom, I told you I wasn't going to be part of anything like. Patricia said fast and flat. Kevin, he stopped. For 4 seconds then. I'm not going to prison for this. I had nothing to do with whatever happened to her car. You said she was already gone. You said she'd moved and we didn't need to. He stopped again. His hands were gripping the armrests of his chair. I'm not. I need to call someone. I looked at Kevin. He'd been my brother for 15 years and was now rapidly calculating how to become something other than that. Kevin, I said, your name is on the consulting transfers. That's the conversation you need to have first. He went quiet. Gerald looked up from the photograph of his truck. His eyes were red. Not performing. Genuinely red. The way a person's eyes go when something collapses that they'd been holding up for a long time. He said, Maya, I didn't know about your car. I want you to know that. Whatever Patricia decided. I didn't know. I held his gaze. You forged your father's signature to redirect his savings into your own accounts for over a year, I said. You watched Pop sit in his workshop and build furniture with hands that were getting slower every month, and you decided his money was already yours. That's what I know about what you knew. He looked down. His hands were flat on the table, palms up, and he didn't close them. I picked up my phone and typed one word to Mia now. 30 seconds. Thomas set down his pen. I took the chisel out of my bag and placed it on the table next to the forensic report. Small tool, worn handle, beveled edge. Pop's Workshop, 1999. 25 years of use in a single object. I put it there because it belonged in the room. The conference room door opened. Mia Park first, badge clipped to her belt, warrant folder in hand, 2 uniforms behind her, 1 more in the hallway. She looked at me. I nodded. Gerald Harmon. Her voice was the practiced voice of a detective who knows that the drama is already in the facts. You are under arrest for elder financial exploitation and forgery. Gerald nodded once, slowly. Like a man who had been waiting for a consequence he always knew was real. He stood when asked. He didn't speak. Patricia rose from her chair. She looked at me across the table and said, with a fury that had nowhere left to go, "You want to take this family apart. That's what you've always wanted. We gave you everything." I put my hands flat on the table. "You gave me yellow curtains and a back bedroom. Pop gave me 30 years of showing up. I know the difference." Mia stepped around the table. "Patricia Harmon, you are under arrest for conspiracy, elder financial exploitation, and forgery." As the officer placed the cuffs on Patricia's wrists, she looked at me one last time over her shoulder. She opened her mouth, closed it. Something in the room, in the weight of those 63 pages on the table, in the 14 documents Pop had quietly assembled for a year, made whatever she was about to say impossible to finish. The door closed behind her. I sat back in my chair. Thomas was already reviewing the executor paperwork. I picked up the chisel and put it back in my bag. Kevin cooperated within 48 hours. He met with the district attorney, laid out the entire structure of the shell entity, and provided text messages showing Patricia's direction of the major transfers. He entered a plea. 18 months probation. Full restitution of the $36,000 and forfeiture of his inheritance share. Gerald received a suspended sentence in exchange for full cooperation and complete restitution of the $153,000 he directly received. His property management company was liquidated. He moved to Flagstaff to live with his sister. I don't know what he does there. I've never asked. Patricia hired 2 attorneys and spent 8 months arguing that the forensic document analysis was flawed. The certified examiner testified for 3 hours. She was convicted on 3 counts. She's serving time at a minimum security facility in northern Arizona, under Arizona's estate fraud provisions. Gerald and Kevin's forfeited inheritance shares were redirected according to secondary distribution instructions. Pop had included in a document he'd filed with Thomas 6 months before he died. The majority went to 2 vocational programs in Tucson that Pop had supported for decades, programs that taught hand-tool woodworking to formerly incarcerated men. One of them had been started by a former apprentice of Pop's who'd done time in his 20s and rebuilt his life in Pop's workshop. My share, I want to be honest about this, I held in trust for a year. Money that arrives through a door like that takes time to feel clean. When it did, I used part of it to renovate Pop's workshop, and I leased the space now to the apprenticeship program at cost. They asked if they could keep the tool pegboard exactly as Pop had left it. I said yes, on one condition: everything goes back where it belongs. 6 months after the arrests, I drove down to Tucson for the program's first open house. 12 students, fresh lumber, the smell of sawdust and linseed oil that I'd been carrying in my memory for 25 years. I walked through the workshop alone before the event started. Cedar shavings on the floor. Someone's radio playing something low. Afternoon light through the high windows catching the dust the way it always had. I stopped at Pop's original workbench in the back corner. I'd arranged for it to stay unmoved, untouched. The surface was worn smooth from 40 years of use. The wood grain slightly raised where it had been worked and reworked and worked again. I'd had one thing framed for that corner, not the forensic report. Just a single paragraph from the certified document examiner's written findings. The paragraph that stated, in careful clinical language, that the signature on the GH Properties authorization was definitively not Raymond Delgado's. That someone else had held that pen and practiced his name and believed that was the same thing as being him. It wasn't. And the wood remembered the difference. I stood in that workshop for a long time. Then I took out the chisel, held it the way Pop had taught me, and thought about the question you're supposed to ask the wood before you cut. I didn't need an answer. Some things you already know. Family isn't a legal document or a shared last name or a bedroom with yellow curtains picked by someone who wanted a daughter more than they wanted a person. Family is the grandfather who spends 16 months building a folder for you in a cloud account, 3 levels deep, because he trusts that you'll find it. It's the attorney who holds a sealed letter for 2 months and drives 2 hours each way in a wheelchair to make sure the right person gets to open it. It's the craftsman who puts a tool in your hands at 9 years old and teaches you how to listen. The people who love you will build you up, even when they're too tired to do it themselves. The people who don't will take what they want and call it family. That's my story. 1 hidden folder, 2 cut break lines, and a grandfather who trusted me with the truth he spent his last year assembling. 1 piece at a time. If this story reminded you of someone who built you up when they had no reason to, tell them today. And if someone needs to hear this, share it. I'll see you in the next one.